Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Genealogy Kickstart series. This series is designed for people who are new to genealogy and want to learn how to get started researching their family tree. In this first lesson, we'll look at some basic genealogical concepts and explore some of the items that you may already have in your family collection that can help you get started. In lesson 2, we'll learn how to take that information and begin recording and organizing it in pedigree charts and family group sheets. We'll also look at how to set basic research goals so that you can begin researching more effectively. In lesson 3, we'll look at some of the common types of records that you'll likely be working with a focus on census records, and in particular, the 1940 United States Census. In lesson 4, we'll look at how to start doing a basic online search for genealogical records using a free site called FamilySearch.org. One of the goals for this series is to try and make it easy for you to get started from home at little or no cost. In lesson 5, we'll look at how to start putting some of the pieces together. We'll first look at simple source citations and why it's important to record where the information you find came from. We'll look at how to create a basic timeline so that you can put the pieces of your ancestors' lives into context. And then we'll look at where you can go to learn more about genealogy. At the end of each of these lessons will be an optional exercise that will allow you to put into practice what you learn in each lesson. But be aware, these 5 brief lessons are just the tip of the iceberg and that there's much more to learn. So let's start with one of the most basic genealogical concepts, working from the known to the unknown. Generally, you start with someone that you know more about. If you're just getting started, usually that's you or one of your parents. You use the information that you know in order to start researching your grandparents. As you find more information and more records about them, it will contain clues that will allow you to start researching your great-grandparents and so forth. The idea is to use the clues that you find in each record to help lead you to the next record, gradually working your way back in time. Eventually, you'll be able to research people that you previously knew very little about and to discover people that you didn't even know existed. For example, you may be able to use a death certificate to help you determine when and where that person was born and who their parents were. That will allow you to jump back to the next generation. As you begin researching, you need to have some key pieces of information about a person. In particular, name, date, and place. You need to know enough about a person in order to recognize when you have found the right record for them. Often, you'll start with their name, but that's not always as easy as it sounds. Nowadays, we generally spell our last name the same way in every record, but that was not always the case in the past. Many of our ancestors were not as concerned about precise spelling, so they may have spelled their name one way in one record and slightly different in a different record. Different members of the same family may have spelled their last name differently. And often the person who is creating the record may not have asked them how the name was spelled and just wrote it on the document, such as a certificate or a census record, the way that it sounded to them. Even the first name can be tricky. In some documents, you may have their full first name. In others, you may have a shortened name or a nickname. For example, a man named William may sometimes go by Bill, or a woman named Mary may use the nickname Polly. The person who is recording the information may only have used their initials rather than a full name. And it was not uncommon for people to start using their middle name at some point in their lives. For example, you may find a document for someone when they were young recorded with their given first name, but then when they became an adult, they decided to start using their middle name, and all of the records from that point on may be in that name. So don't worry too much if the name is not exactly the same in every record. Don't assume that you have the wrong person. Always keep in mind all of the possible spellings and variations that might have been used for that person. Another thing to keep in mind is when. Either the date when something such as a marriage might have occurred, or when someone may have been born. If you have an idea of their age, then you can compare them in different records and have an idea of whether it's the correct person. But even then, don't get too hung up on the precise age. In the past, our ancestors generally did not have to provide their exact birth date on a lot of records like we do today. So they may have just guessed or estimated what their age was on a given record. Or the person who was providing that information, such as a spouse or another family member, may not even know the exact age of the person they were providing the information about. So in some records, the age may be a little bit younger or a little bit older than what you expect. So always keep in mind a possible age range in order to recognize that person, and not be worried if the age is not exact in every document. It can also help to keep in mind location. Where did that person live at different times in their life in order to know where to look for the records? Again, don't worry too much if the person is not always in the precise location that you expect. Our ancestors were often more mobile than we give them credit for. For example, one of my ancestors married and started a family in New York State, but in order to find work, he moved the family to Massachusetts for about 10 years and then moved the family back to New York and spent the rest of his life there. If I only looked in the New York records, it would appear as if the family disappeared for 10 years. So I had to be flexible about where the record may have occurred. It helps to keep the names of other people associated with that ancestor in mind, such as a spouse, a parent, or a child. So if those names appear together in the same record, it's easier to distinguish one person from another. For example, Say your grandfather's name is John Smith. There was probably more than one John Smith of approximately the same age that might have been living near your ancestor. You may need to take a combination of their age and another family member that appears in the record in order to distinguish which is your John Smith from a different John Smith. You may have more information at your fingertips than you realize. Often, families have family history collections, items that for one reason or another have been kept and passed down over time. Often, they have information such as birth, marriage, and death certificates. They may have documents that they needed to hold on to as proof, such as a deed, military papers, and other types of government documents. Often, if a family member appeared in the local newspaper, someone would clip out that article and save it. It may have things like birth announcements or wedding announcements. Often you'll find obituaries for various family members. And it may just be little Jimmy winning the spelling bee in 5th grade. You may find letters, postcards, diaries, and other types of documents written by different family members. If you're lucky, you may find a family Bible in which the births, marriages, and deaths of various family members have been recorded over time. You may find funeral cards, baptismal records, and other types of church records that someone has held on to. You may find certificates, awards, and medals. These can help to place a person in a given location at a given time. Many families have held on to old photographs. These photographs can have all kinds of clues in them. You may be able to determine where the photograph was taken or who the people in the photograph were. Look to see what they're wearing, their clothes, their hairstyle. Accessories such as jewelry and hats can help you to date when that photo may have been taken. There may be clues that will allow you to determine their social status or even their ethnic origin. And don't forget the family heirlooms. Those aren't always just the expensive things, such as jewelry or a grandfather clock that was passed down. It may have been keepsakes that meant something important to the person who held on to it or marked a special event in their life. These are just a few of the items in my own family history collection. Each item provides information about a different family member and helps to tell the story of their life. As you get started, there are some things to keep in mind. First, not all information is easy to find. You'll soon discover that some ancestors are easier to research than others, but don't let that discourage you. Not everything is available online, much as we would like it to be. This may seem surprising at first as you begin researching and discover just how much is out there. But sooner or later, in order to answer a question such as when someone was married, you may need to contact or visit a repository where a record is kept that has not been digitized. For example, it may be an archive, a library, or an historical society. It may be a county courthouse or even a cemetery. More recent records may be protected by privacy laws. So if you're looking for something like a birth or death record for a recent family member, those can take a little bit more work than records that are older that have been placed online. Use family trees that you find online as clues, not facts. It's very easy to find a family tree online with family members that you recognize and blindly copy that information without having any idea of where that information came from or how accurate it is. Unless the person who placed that tree also provides a reliable source for that information, always try to verify the facts yourself and determine, is the information accurate or not? Always be aware that some sources are more reliable than others. For example, did that information come from someone who is trying to remember an event that occurred many years ago, or something that he heard from someone else? Or is that information from a document that was recorded at or near the time of the event by someone who witnessed firsthand that event? And don't stop with the first record that appears to answer a question, such as when someone was born. There's always a chance that for one reason or another, there may be an error in that record. If possible, try to find multiple records that all answer the same question in order to try and determine how accurate it is. Look at the different records side by side. Do they all agree? If so, the odds are better that that information is accurate. However, if it's different, then you need to determine where the source of that information came from and try to decide which is more reliable and therefore more likely to be accurate. And last, not all information is what we expect. One of the fun things about doing genealogy is to discover all of the surprising stories about our family. However, sooner or later, you'll find out that some of those surprises turn out to be the skeletons that have been buried in the family closet. But don't get too discouraged by this either. Always keep in mind that our ancestors were people too, just as fallible and just as human as we are today. For the first exercise, I like to call this one the scavenger hunt. Try to find out what you may already have that can provide information. Look to see what's in your family history collection, such as birth records, newspaper clippings, and other types of items. Maybe they're in an old shoebox that's been stored in the back of a closet. If you're very lucky, it may even be an entire trunk. Look at each thing that you find and try to determine what information it contains or is associated with it, such as names, dates, places, and events. If you're able to, start checking with other family members to see what they might have. Often, when an older family member passes away, the items that they have are distributed among the family members, so that one cousin may have items completely different from another cousin. Each of these is a piece of the puzzle to your family story. Maybe your family members can help you identify people in photographs that you have that you don't recognize. Or they may have been told a family story that you didn't know about. This is a great time to start interviewing the oldest members of your family to find out what stories they know before those stories are lost. Next time, we'll look at how to take the information either that you already know or that you learn through your scavenger hunt and start recording and organizing it so that you'll be able to have it ready to move on to the next step in your genealogical journey.